Here, Reuben, come and look, quick.
What is it, boy?
The light of the sun shining off a big yellow digger. Fellow wearing a wide-brimmed hat and leather jacket. Went over there into the sand, it did.
Nothing there now.
Not now, maybe. I told you it went behind the sand dunes.
It could have been a... what do they call 'em? Treasure seeker.
Went far off.
Reckon I know what you've seen. They always said the Beast of Joss would be back.
The Beast of Joss?
Aye.
Here comes Ben.
Quick, get that door closed. Did you see him, Ben?
Who?
The Beast of Joss.
Tah, there's no such person.
They say he haunts relay transmitting stations like this.
He might be after those film cans we buried on the beach.
Don't be daft.
The last time that beast was seen in Devon, 2 men were fired that very same night. Cleaned out a small film store. Broke their hearts, he did. Didn't just take their Doctor Who, but Basil Brush too, and a whole load of old comedies. Whole place burned down shortly after.
They ain't got nothing to transmit, no, but a test card and static.
That old tale again.
More'n a tale. Vince saw him tonight. Sun shining off his JCB, so he said.
Don't let him take our Marco Polo, Reuben. Please.
Don't worry, boy. Pass me that carpet. We'll hide the film cans underneath it. That'll keep him safe. He'll never look there.
And we pitched another documentary during that documentary with the whole cookbook thing. But yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, and I do want to talk about the cookbook because, as I mentioned on the one I did with Chris, I mean, I watched this with my daughter. My daughter's in her early teens, and we've watched quite a lot of the original series together. So she knew quite a lot of the people that were on it. But she really enjoyed it. She really responded to the humour and to the situation. And of course, she's seen MasterChef, so she got the joke with India Fisher doing the voiceover. But I think what I liked most of all about it was, and I said this to Chris, you can do an out and out spoof. And as he said, I think on the recording, you're not going to get very far with that because. Where's the fun in simply sending something up? And in fact, though there seems to be something very organic about it, they actually enjoyed the task you set them in terms of the cooking, or you and Chris set them in terms of the cooking, and also in some of the pairings, the relationship came out in the course of the task, so you kind of got to see a little bit about the relationship there. So I really enjoyed that. I guess I wonder again what it was like for you in that situation. I mean, there's a lot going on. There's cooking going on.
Yeah.
You're trying to do an interview sort of with the person. There's a recipe you've got to follow. I mean, what was it like trying to do that?
It was hard, and in fact, I think we were supposed to do some of the links when we were doing the Lenny Mayne documentary, which was filmed a lot of it at my house.
Right.
And we were going to do the cookbook links as well. And we'd had a long day. And I think Chris sensed that I was a bit knackered and a bit testy, and he said, "We're gonna leave the cookbook because we're not. Yeah, we're gonna do that. I'm gonna come back." I think he was trying to save a bit of cash by doing both at the same time, and we ended up not doing so because I think I was a bit knackered, and it's when you're full on when you're filming in lights and no fresh air and all of that sort of thing, which is again shows his great sensitivity. Funny enough, you've just reminded me. But when you said the word spoof. My first potential involvement was with the range was when somebody came to see my show Moths Ate My Doctor Who scarf and asked to meet up, and we had a drink, and he said, I'm involved in the DVD range, and have you got any ideas for sort of spoof comedy type documentaries, and I thought I'd got loads because they'd done the Pyramids of Mars one that was very funny,
right?
With
Yes.
and because I'm a comedian, there was a sort of suggestion, oh, do you want to do some of that stuff? And I had a few ideas, and I decided it was a pretty thankless task. Much as I would have loved to have been involved in the DVD range because it was miles away. I didn't know anybody. I've never been part of organised fandom. I didn't know anybody. I sometimes think we all live in the same house and drink in the same pub and are all mates. I'm afraid I got the work on merit because I didn't know any of the people.
Yeah.
And I actually ended up going, I don't think I'm going to pitch anything. I don't want to do a spoof because the target audience don't really like them. Unless you're somebody with a name, I think they just go, who's this guy? It would be Adric syndrome. Why is this guy trying to be funny about Doctor Who? Well, I could be doing that. But as a result of that meeting, I mentioned, I emailed, and I said, oh, why is the War Machine's only got these 2 contributors on it? What about all these people? And they went, they didn't know they were still alive. And I was like, oh, come on, they're in Spotlight. I could have put you in touch with them, blah, 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 blah. And out of that came a sort of, would you ever be interested in moderating one? And I went, God, I dream of that. Some people do Oscar speeches. I'd be on my bike going, welcome to the DVD commentary for Doctor Who. So out of that, I got the moderating gig, which to me was much better because there's no pressure to be funny. You could be a little bit anonymous. You do it best if people don't sort of notice you're there, sort of thing. So I had been offered sort of comedy stuff. And actually in the Robophobia documentary, there were a few jokes at the expense of Doctor Who and some of Doctor Who's robots. And I said, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be some smart-ass comedian taking the mickey out of Doctor Who. I've seen loads of crap documentaries on the telly that do that, and I'm not interested in that. I love Doctor Who. I'm not going to start... I get a bit annoyed when fans sort of go, yeah, isn't it a bit rubbish? And you go, well, what are you doing here then? Do you know what I mean? I don't think I'm better than Doctor Who. I am, I love Doctor Who. I'm in Doctor Who's shadow. I'm not going to. I might amongst my friends if I'm in a chortly mood, but no. So anyway, then comes along the cookbook. Now, years down the line, we suggest the cookbook as a joke in Matthew Waterhouse's kitchen, and Chris goes, I actually think that's a really good idea. And I went, all right, fine. Again thinking I'm doing my last documentary. Chris has come up with another idea and he pitches it and it happens. To be honest, I thought people would hate it. I thought, I get away with being on the Havoc thing because it's getting the old team back together, the Peter R. Newman, finding out a few things. There's always me dicking about with the Doctor Who cookbook. And you could sort of go, well, people might like to see the stars from Doctor Who with the Doctor Who cookbook. That's one thing, but that comedian guy's all already on the blooming commentaries and already on this, that. Oh, we're sick of him. I actually thought it might be the time people just down tools and went, right, we've had enough of him. Burn him. And I didn't think people would be interested. I thought it was too arcane. I didn't think people would like the humour of it particularly. And I kept trying to stick in, like the bit with the Richard Herndl, the sort of, we've got a bit of historical stuff here. We've got a letter from Richard Herndl. That was what I thought would be the stuff that people liked. But people like the regulars, and they like watching them at conventions and the banter. And Chris, he's a very smart guy. He cast it very well. Janet and Sarah are good. It was actually really nice having it in Sarah's kitchen because it was Sarah's turf, and Sarah too often, because she's so polite and lovely and nice, takes a back seat. We're in Sarah's place, and I met her first, and then Janet sort of came in and wielded the knife. So I thought that was automatically a slightly different dynamic.
Yes, and also I think Sarah kind of knows what she's doing in a cooking scenario. I mean,
she does.
So again, that gives her a little bit of a front foot, I suppose, in that. Yeah.
Yeah, I really enjoyed Sarah's company in that one, and I do sometimes think she takes a back seat, and I felt I found out a lot more about her and her character. And Fraser is good fun, so I knew I'd have had a laugh with him. I really liked Terry Malloy, and he entered into the spirit of it. And then I got Doctor Who and Perry in Perry's house, cooking, of course, not the recipe for the book, and had a lovely time. But I wasn't sure. I thought people might go, if you're going to spend the money to get Colin Baker, get him to tell us about the making of the two Doctors. Don't get him to cook a cheesecake. But people responded really nicely to it. So I'm delighted, but I was worried. Not because I had a problem with the quality of the programme. I thought it was, Chris is a very, very good programme maker, and he gets very good cameramen and, shoots it on good stock and makes it look, they look proper.
Yes.
He saves money on the presenters, and and it's been, people have loved it. So great, and it's created another strand, the revisited strand.
Yes.
So I've got the living with a companion strand. I've got the looking for somebody who don't know much about strand, and I've got the revisited strand. So having gone from going, well, I've done my last, I'm now sort of going, I've got 3 dangling strands now. To the extent that there was a box set out the other day, and one of the reviews said, there's no Toby Hadoke documentary on this one, and I'm like, well, no, there's not supposed to. I'm not supposed to be on everyone, but are people now expecting me to be on everyone? And that's quite nice. That I even get mentioned on the review of a box set I'm not on.
yeah. So it's the polar opposite of the sniffy review about Levine.
Yes.
Now saying why hasn't he done one?
Yes.
So, Fugitive of the Judoon by Vinay Patel and Chris Chibnall. So, only 3 weeks after my complete history of the Time Lords, and we're going to have to revise that. So they're back. We've got a new Doctor, Captain Jack, and a beautiful TARDIS set. Who was to kick us off?
Well, this series keeps getting better and better, doesn't it? Suddenly, I find myself, I don't know how you guys feel, I'm looking forward to Doctor Who every Sunday again. There's so much. I mean, we've called this a mini podcast. There's so much to talk about here. So many ways in which the story and 13th Doctor's arc could spin off now. What a fantastic episode. I thought it looked glorious, the cathedral setting. We saw a new TARDIS interior and an altogether different TARDIS. That was fantastic. There's so many mysterious things that could unravel now over the rest of the series. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and it was superb. Jodie Whittaker's getting better and better each week. She had, I thought her dialogue throughout was fantastic. I don't know, how many surprises can you pop into an episode? What did you think, Giles?
Oh, I thought, yeah, absolutely. It was pleasant surprise, because I must say, coming up to this one, I'd kind of heard. The only chatter I'd heard was a couple of people saying, "Oh, we're supposed to expect surprises of some sort or other." I think Nikki Wilson had made a tweet to that effect. I was completely spoiler free. I don't know whether any of this stuff did get out, but yeah, I must say I kind of went in thinking, "Oh, yeah, I'm not particularly excited by this episode," and it really caught me on the hop, and it was great, just like a wham bam, yeah. First the Captain Jack thing, then then you thought, hang on, that's that whole thing with breaking the light. That starts to look a bit. I was thinking, shit, has she been fob watched? And pardon my language. And lo and behold, and then I thought, okay, who is she? And then so it was a really good, kept the surprises coming, and brilliant and completely up the stakes on what I've really been kind of expecting from what we've come to get used to with Chibnall's era as we've had it so far.
It was great. You actually had to watch all the way to the end of the story. They kept the who is the fugitive going all the way through. Sustain. That's people have had a dig at Chibbers and his writing, but Chibbers and Vinay they played a blinder this week. I thought that the scripting was excellent. And I was absolutely glued to the screen. It was superb.
So I mean, as Giles was suggesting, when I started to watch it, I mean, it looks like a sort of RTD-esque, slightly comedy episode set in Gloucester. I mean, nothing wrong with RTD's episodes. When we talked about Smith and Jones, we all kind of liked that one, as I recall. You've got nice early stuff with the tourists and Ruth kind of trying to capture it. Nice cuts there. The Judoon arrive and there's a typical kind of mayhem and there's comedy deaths, there's callous deaths, but I mean it's all very much of a piece with what you might expect with the Judoon involved, and then suddenly great twists and better I think than the Master in Spyfall, and we thought that was pretty impressive to keep that under wraps. To me, suddenly this feels like a different show. I mean, where was this in series 11? What happened last year? It's almost unrecognisable. So in one way, you could say a fairly slight episode. I mean, you couldn't say that I suppose the envelope of the plot was particularly astonishing. I mean, fundamentally, they start off in Gloucester. There's a trip to the lighthouse. they go up to the Judoon ship in the TARDIS and then back down again. But the 56 years of history and a series of surprises gives it incredible weight, and a bold and fresh approach, and daring, I guess, to challenge some of the things that we've held as facts for a very long time. Okay, so I think moving on to producer. So I'll kick us off on this one, and then you can come in behind me. So I guess for very similar reasons to you picking David Whittaker, I've gone for Verity Lambert for my producer, because I feel like she picked up the programme from a piece of paper and turned it into reality. Mm-hmm. And by the time she left the programme, its future was essentially assured. I mean, don't get me wrong, there were wrinkles along the way, and there was a pretty big hurdle to overcome, both, I guess, at the end of the Hartnell and Troughton eras. But nonetheless, it had gone from being, look, here's a thing that might be fun to make, to here's a staple of the, a fixture, I suppose, of the schedules. Mm-hmm. It had been already been running for a couple of years, and it was sort of guaranteed to run for a third year. And I think also, what might be interesting, based on your potential discussion, is okay. I mean, the Verity from the 60s was a force already, but Verity maybe by the 80s. Or 90s, having gained so much more experience in television production, we might have seen at that stage maybe another side to her.
That would have been yeah, because that was like her first job as a producer, was basically doing Doctor Who. There's such a revolution in the way that first series is made. Like, it's thrown away. Just give it to this 27-year-old woman.
Yeah.
We'll let this young Indian director had the first episode, whatever. It's just out of the way. It's a thing. It's there to fill the gap in the schedules. Go nuts. And then, 5 weeks later, the Daleks appear and everything changes.
Yeah.
So I love how she transitions from that scrappy go-getter of a series to all of a sudden in series 2, it becomes like, let's try comedy. Let's try a massive madcap Dalek chase. Let's go to an alien planet where literally no one is a human being. We don't have the money for it, but we're going to go for it anyway. Like, it goes, it just the boundless imagination of those first 2 seasons, I think, are a credit to her role as producer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, I guess there have been female producers in the new series, but really the only time that the series has ever been overseen by a woman.
Yeah.
In its run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Women have what's her name at the Joanna Spicer at the BBC was very responsible for getting the series greenlit in the first place. You have Delia Derbyshire, of course, making the music. You have Verity Lambert. I mean, and then you have like Julie Gardner and Jane Tranter in the modern series, bringing it back. Women sadly don't feature as prominently in Doctor Who history as they should, but they're there at the crucial moments to make the show happen.
Absolutely. Stephen, who's your pick?
Well, I mean, I could make a case for pretty much every single producer in this list.
Yep.
I'm fascinated by the John Wiles era. It didn't last long. He hated being there, but I thought he pushed Doctor Who in these weird, uncomfortable directions that I think it's important for a show at that time of its lifespan to go on. Innes Lloyd, I think, helped sort of create what we know now as Doctor Who. The Troughton era, I think, is sort of the first modern, if you will, instance of how the show is going to be made for the next 50 years. Derek Sherwin, Peter Bryant, Unit, that helped establish a format that was very popular. Barry Letts made the show prime time viewing and 8, 10, 11 million viewers, which it never really had in like a constant run as he did in his time. Then, of course, it's Philip Hinchcliffe. But I am choosing, because based on potential and perhaps getting the short straw, I'm choosing Graham Williams. I'm going through yet another reappraisal of the Graham Williams era as of late. It is slightly nostalgia tinged. I grew up in that era. I stopped watching the show for a couple of years because I didn't have the means to watch it, and then when I came back into it, happened to just be Graham Williams coming around again. So that's my happy spot. But there is just a sense of fun to the show and fantasy and, moving away from the horror movie tropes of the Hinchcliffe Holmes era to like more of a fantastical based in sort of classic literature elements as well, but also with some, perhaps driven by the script editors of the day, like, Image of the Fendel and Horror of Fang Rock are very much holdovers from the previous year.
Yeah.
There's some great ambition in those 3 seasons that are completely undone by the economic situation of the time. They'd basically run out of money before they had it even spent, by the time, well, we budgeted for this, but 4 months later, by the way, your budget's gone. So I would have loved to have Graham Williams have a proper budget and less strife, and he was half the team responsible for City of Death. Douglas Adams wrote it, but Graham Williams locked the door and poured the coffee, and he had his part to play as well. And he didn't get the sign-off that he deserved in Shada because it, of course, was canceled by a strike. So I always thought that Graham Williams deserved another kick at the cat.
Yeah. We've just been watching Androids of Tara for this podcast, and it was a lot of fun, actually.
Oh,
yeah, and so I mean, I won't say too much more, but yeah, I think we all very much enjoyed watching it, and it possibly will help me to reappraise his era.
I hope. I know you said you're a little hazy on the Graham Williams era. It's just so. It's just lovely. I love the Androids of Tara so much. It's basically Doctor Who's version of The Princess Bride. I think there's just swashbuckling going on. Only one character dies in the entire thing, and it's Madame Lamia, and she basically gets hit by by a random laser bolt, which are amazing in and of itself. I think the visual effects in Graham Williams' era are amazing. Some of the model work is the best ever in the history of the show. Like the Pirate Planet has a wonderful explosion at the end, and then Hordes of Nymon even has some excellent model work and everything. And to go back to the lack of female characters in Robert Holmes' stuff, the Graham Williams era is awash with strong female characters, especially Stones of Blood, and Creature from the Pit even features a strong performance from Maya Francis, and it's become a very happy place for me during this pandemic, but just overall the Graham Williams era.
Fantastic.
Come on, Sam. Don't give me the numbers this time. I know you think it increased the tension.
Oh no!
Just give me the production code.
I'll give you these, Paul. I'll give you these. But Richard has to go first on the classic Who story. Okay?
What?
Or you take over when Richard...
Oh, all right. Yeah, we'll do that.
All right. So I'm going to give you the numbers.
Yeah.
The first one is story 111, Meglos. And then it's 201, Midnight. Richard first on Meglos, please, and then over to Paul for Meglos and Midnight.
Okay.
Paul, that will give you a little bit of thinking time.
I remember very clearly watching all 4 episodes of The Leisure Hive. I also very clearly remember watching all 4 episodes of Full Circle. For some unaccountable reason, I have absolutely no memory whatsoever of anything happening in between those two, and I can only conclude that I must have randomly failed to watch Meglos for some reason. So all I can tell you is that it's got an alien in it that looks like a cactus, and at some point turns into Tom Baker because there's a waxwork of him, and then also it was directed by Terence Dudley, and the only reason I know that is because Hugh Turbeville mentioned it on Something Who a few episodes back. So there you go. Paul, you can tell us about it properly now.
No, I can't. If I could remember, I researched it. We did a very in-depth podcast on the whole of season 18, and the strangest thing is that all 3 participants, that was Tim, myself, and Matthew. I was pretending I couldn't remember his name. That's very cruel. Hi, Matt. He's not watching. The oddest thing was that we all came to the conclusion that Meglos was not the weakest or worst, or generally our least favourite story of the season, which we all went into it assuming it would be. I went into it assuming it would be because I hadn't seen it since until last year. I haven't seen it since the time. It's famously a story that it's a hangover. It was written not for season 17, but the writers had season 17 in their heads, and they were writing Douglas Adams style, Graham Williams style comedy Who, hence the ridiculousness of the premise. And then incoming script editor Christopher Holy Bidmead took out most of the jokes, and it was so early was he in his script editorship that he hadn't realised you needed to replace them with something. So most of the episodes are about 19 minutes long, I think. I am exaggerating, so don't correct me. So it's a very strange experience. There are still some jokes in it, but he's cut out all the Doctor's funny lines, which is an odd experience. You've got the very serious season 18 Doctor that we've just been introduced to. There's the very grave, for no particular reason, Doctor of season 18, because he hasn't even spotted the oncoming heat death of the universe yet, but somehow he's lost his joie de vivre. And yet he's walking through not wisecracking in the middle of all this ridiculousness and turning into a cactus, and Freddie Treves overacting. So that really is peculiar, and also has a story. Don't like religious maniacs. The elements just don't fit together. Space pirates in with flamboyant shoulder pads, cacti. Barbara Wright pretending to be a religious alien zealot. I mean, it just doesn't cohere. And yet somehow it's not my least favourite thing to watch out of season 18. That was far too long. Midnight. Ah, well, now we're talking. Yeah, I mean, I've always thought that stories that don't have a companion in offer a great opportunity to concentrate on the plotting and really get into the nuts and bolts and the meat of what Doctor's good at without all this namby-pamby emotions and stuff. I've always thought that, and I've told my theory to some of my good friends. I don't know if it's lodged with any of them, but yes, it's Russell. After writing a lot of the big episodes in the first couple of years of New Who, the tentpole ones, the ones that needed to set the tone, relaxed a bit later on, didn't he, and started giving himself the freedom to write stuff outside of his comfort zone. You could say he's also seeing if he could do a Moffat with this one, which I guess is a bit unfair. It's not just a stylistic exercise, because it conspicuously doesn't do what Moffat would have done, because it doesn't explain anything, but it is an exercise in atmosphere and lacking, I guess, the sense of that people's innate humanity will save the day that is common to most of Russell's work. It's absent here. So, yes, pretty strong meat. Is there a link between the two? Yes, they begin with the letter M.
Oh.
Oh, it's gone quiet.
Yeah, I'm not
Who's
sure.
turned into a pumpkin?
Well, it's all very well for Flanagan and Allen, or whatever they're called, to tell their story where they're sat there and they just can't think what a villain would look like. And, there's a cactus on the table. Let's make it a cactus in a plant pot.
Yeah, it could have been a bowl of potpourri. We should thank ourselves that.
And they're proud of this story as if it's some brilliant conceit. I'm not allowed to swear, am I?
Well, we'll take it as read that you just have done.
It's a plant pot with a cactus in it. Flanagan and Allen.
There aren't even any songs in it. It's not up to their usual. They just weren't, unless Bidmead cut all those out as well. I bet he did, didn't he?
I think when you get in amongst it, apart from the wigs and the cactus, and Jackie Hill, whose performance is a bit odd, and the old what's her mate called? The old wise guy who knew the Doctor.
Oh, I hate stories with people who know the Doctor. That only comes in JNT.
He's rubbish as well. But apart from all of that, in terms of plotting and pace and comedy bits, it's fine.
Yeah.
It stands out in season 18, as does the State of Decay, in that it's an older story, isn't it? It's an older style story, an older style for Potter.
Tim, is it true that you have very clear memories of this, not so much the story itself, but of Tom Baker as a character, despite the fact you were only 3 months old when it was broadcast? Yeah. And have you ever wondered how that can be?
No, I haven't, Paul.
Oh.
We discussed on Monday night, listeners, that my first clear memory of Doctor Who is Adric flailing around in I can't remember what it's called, but the machine and Kinder. And then various firm memories from then on. But I also was very confused when I flipped open a Peter Haining book in the 80s and saw Tom Baker as Meglos, and I had full recognition of it.
I was really hoping it was going to be that you'd gone to Madame Tussauds or wherever it was. Maybe somebody suggested it was Blackpool. I think somebody would have to have been Richard. He's the only other person here.
I think it was Tim, wasn't it?
I was really hoping it was because you'd seen the waxwork at a formative age, but you don't think you did.
I don't think I was Swords by that point, but I may well have been to the Blackpool exhibition. So if Meglos was at the Blackpool exhibition, that might be an explanation for it. Or I remember it as Well, I was born in May 79, and the first story after I was born was Destiny of the Daleks.
Ah.
Yeah.
Now you're talking.
So I must have been 1 year old or one and a bit. And I'd find it highly unlikely I would have been awake at that point and being able to recall things on the brightly coloured machine in the corner of the room. But then again, I am quite special, so...
Maybe sort of Wookiee hole. I gather a lot of the old unneeded, redundant waxworks from Madame Tussauds end up in storage at Wookiee hole. Something to do with the cooled caves. There's a Davros down there as well. It's all true.
We established at the start, Tim, how special you are. Although, of course, Paul is every bit as special. That part may have been lost in the whole kind of technical fault debacle, but we'll see. We'll see whether that survived for posterity. But just in case, I'll make the point again. So you also wrote that book, Doctor Who: The Early Years, and I think that was also where you brought together some of the personal collections of Ray Kuzik and Barry Newbury to illustrate it.
Just Ray, unfortunately, wasn't able to go. Barry was on the list, but it was purely Ray.
Okay, sure. And I mean, I guess that was a way for you to recreate the that excitement you'd had as a boy watching those early shows.
Well, yes, that was a very big part of it, because Ray was one of those people that had a phenomenal photographic collection, because he'd happened to buy himself a very nice camera just the time he was starting to work on Doctor Who. So he had all this wonderful colour stuff, all these wonderful black and whites. He kept all his technical drawings, construction drawings, conceptual artwork, everything. And you thought, oh God, this story cries out to be told, because everyone always says, oh, Daleks were created by Terry Nation. Well, yes, he wrote the words, and he does deserve the plaudits for that. But he didn't create the design. He wasn't the one that designed the Concorde, designed the mini car. He was the guy that designed the Dalek, which is every bit as iconic a design. And there was sort of a wish to see justice served for Ray's contribution to Doctor Who, which was vast. And because I'd been working quite closely with the author Peter Haining,
right,
3 or 4 big coffee table Doctor Who books from Celebration onwards.
Yeah.
And Peter's the one that said, well, basically kicked me up the backside and said, well, go and write your own bloody book then. Just worry about looking after me with my books, go and do one of your own. And that was at the time of discovering Ray's collection. So Peter was my mentor. Taught me how to write and not to assume knowledge, and gave me an insight into how the publishing industry worked, the book industry worked, and bless his heart, made a couple of introductions to W.H. Allen, which of course had the advantage of a chap called Nigel Robinson being involved with the target range, and he was obviously part of W.H. Allen, so that gave the opportunity to come forward with what these days would be called the pitch document, to say this is what you're proposing to do. Because Doctor Who Celebration by Peter Haney had been so successful, they thought, well, a book that's even more lavishly illustrated, which has got even more content, and it's about Daleks, provided we can get the dreaded Roger Hancock to agree the Terry Nation component, yes, well, let's go ahead and do it. And that's the bit that they did, which then freed me up just to spend all the time that I was doing with Ray, going through everything and trying to build up what was going to become a book about the early years. Everybody thinks that I was going to follow it with the intermediate years. I was saying, no, this definitely was the attempt to try and redress the balance in a little bit more in favour of Ray's contribution. And I'm never surprised to this day that I think it achieved that. It was certainly, it did seem to be well received. There was some things that happened that gave it something extra than was ever planned. When Christopher Barry showed me those original telesnaps, the first time I'd ever seen a telesnap in my life, and I thought, gosh, the first Troughton episode of the Regeneration, crikey, we've got to put that in there. So yes, that was very serendipitous that was there at the time the book was being compiled.
Sure, yeah. I mean that's a big memory for me. That was seeing those photos at the back of the book, and very exciting to get a glimpse into that part of the story.
Yeah, just because it was a behind the scenes piece, and that it's always struck me down the years how much of a thirst Doctor Who fans have, not just to know the in front of the camera stories, but also the stories behind the stories. So that was one of the big attempts to do that.
So until Chris produced those telesnaps, was anyone aware that telesnaps even existed as a thing?
Memory suggests that there was some rumblings. I think other directors had shown frames and things from them. But this, I think, was the first time, A, that they surfaced from a story that didn't exist, and B, they were for all 6 episodes.
Right.
Which was quite huge. And I think Gary Lee for Doctor Who Bulletin, that he managed to interview a few people who had copies of some telesnaps as well. It was only really when I think it was Marcus Hearn that went along to the BBC's research facility at Caversham, who discovered whole volumes of it and then brought them, to light. And suddenly Marvel was being asked to, or not Marvel, it had been Panini by then, being asked to put their hands in their pockets to pay to have a whole load of these brought in so they could be made available to the wider world. So those stories that don't exist, yes, they're probably the nearest you'll get to giving you a visual flavour of those stories, particularly for ones where photographs are a bit thinner on the ground.
Sure. And so, I mean, I'm going way out of order here, but you mentioned Doctor Who: A Celebration. So was your contribution to that all the stuff around the episode guide and so on, or was it wider than that?
The bit that was laughingly called the Whoniverse, yes, right, entirely mine. But again, Peter was one of those people that came round and we ended up sat round my parents' dining room, surrounded by all the photographs, collections, documents, and things that I'd amassed that time. While Peter was going through, bouncing ideas off and saying, "Well, what do you think to this? What do you think to that?" And asking me to be, in a way, to be the proof checker for the technical integrity of what he was getting sourced. Because as we kind of find out, in some people's cases, the memories do cheat. Caroline Ford famously always insists that Doctor Who went out live, whereas what she's actually remembering is the show being done as live, but it was still recorded. So you had to bounce between somebody being interviewed who's asserting one thing, Whereas, from the paperwork or even counter arguments that it was possibly done a different way, and using that as a means of building up a picture as to how a production was done. So yes, Peter pretty latched on to, here we've got a Doctor Who expert can help me hopefully compile a book that will be read by people and not laughed out of court for just being a complete supercilious overview of the programme, when we've got an opportunity here to do something a little bit more in depth, which is what ultimately Celebration did attempt to do.
Sure. And I think also my memory then of the early years is, as you were describing earlier, all of those fantastic photos and drawings of the different sets. Again, it's a sort of material that I'd never seen before, and I suppose also helping to bring those stories to life. I mean, I think as far as the Daleks was concerned, the only one I'd seen was episode 2, which was shown in the National Film Theatre or somewhere like that. I managed to, I think it was an offshoot in Bradford. I managed to get to see that once in the 80s. But this was still before I'd ever seen the story on video. So those kinds of photos and set designs really brought it to life for me. Simon, do you want to do your strand next?
Yeah, I'll just explain. Because I enjoyed the Crusade so much, Giles, I thought I'd do a bit of research on all the historicals and what truly makes historical Doctor Who classic story. And I started to find the lines a bit blurred. So what I was going to do is just pick some at random, and then you and Richard have to decide whether it's a historical or not.
Oh, okay, right.
So
off we go. How about the gunfighters?
Oh,
well, I mean, that seems pretty straightforwardly historical. There's no kind of weird alien tech going on. They sort of land in the middle of a historical event.
So far as we can, yes, yeah. No, it's the thing. Yeah, it's interesting because the moment you actually threw me the question, I was going to say, well, this will be easy because basically, if it doesn't have anything, but now I'm thinking, okay, well, the gunfighters is so much set in Western fiction rather than
yes, I suppose there is
rather than anything that approximates the real Old West. But yes, it's a historical in terms of we're not going to have any no mucking around with the space-time continuum.
Yeah, I mean, it's as realistic as the Crusade is. It seems to be set in a Shakespeare play.
Yes, I suppose it is, except in a different direction.
Yeah.
I love it. But just for the avoidance of doubt, I love the gunfighters.
Yes. Yeah. So
despite all that awful singing.
Because of all that awful singing,
you like all that. Perhaps that was the sort of Christmas special almost of its day.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Well, that wasn't shown then.
I always try and love the singing, and I always make a brave attempt, and then somewhere around about the middle of episode 3 it breaks me.
Okay, moving on. How about the Time Warrior? That lovely medieval setting.
Yeah.
And I think it's Iron. Is it Irongron and his merry men?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, so this one, that's an interesting question. So there's two questions about that one. I mean, first off, you've got a healthy amount of present day at the start before they go back. And then, of course, when they go back, there's a Sontaran in it. I mean, personally, for me, I don't disqualify it simply because it's got a bit of alien in the historical setting. I think, on the whole, the bit in the historical setting is played sort of relatively straight. Yeah, it's not a historical in the sense that the Hartnells and the One Troughton was, but they make a fair stab at the historical setting. What do you think, Charles?
I'm just trying to think this through because I'm just thinking about what how are we defining historical, and I think maybe there's something to be said for the idea that rather than just our sort of classically derived definition that it's like if it hasn't got aliens in it.
Yeah.
It's a pure historical. I'm thinking, okay, is it more to do with whether there's a pivotal moments of history and things like that in it? And it does rather use the history as a backdrop rather than Well, although it handles it nicely, the history isn't essential to the story, I don't think. So,
It's only sense story insofar as they're useless to the Sontaran, so he has to reach forward into the future in order to sort it out.
Quite right, yes.
But you're right. I mean, aside from that, it could have been any time. It just happens to be the Middle Ages.
But that does add a whole other level of science fiction to it. Of course, the time snatching and so on. So, no, I think it's got too. I think it's got too much.
Yeah.
Too much sci-fi for me to count it as historical, personally.
Okay, what about the Black Orchid?
I've always thought of Black Orchid as being a straightforward historical. There, there's the funny bit where they sort of show them the TARDIS as if that's going to solve everything, but that aside, it's a country house historical, isn't it? Go on.
Yes, that is the weirdest. Yeah, that you just put your finger on something there, which that has to be the weirdest and most gratuitous bit of let's show everyone the TARDIS. There's absolutely no reason for that whatsoever in that story, is there? And it's just like, we're not being faced with an extraterrestrial threat. We've not. Yeah. Oh, by the way, yes. Did I mention that we're space-time flappers? Flappers, I said. Yeah. No, that is really odd. And again, thinking of the definition I'm possibly groping towards, I think it's a period piece, but it's not. Again, historical is an interesting question because the historical aspect of it really doesn't come into it as such.
I think the kids would think they're ones with no monsters.
Yeah,
and then a more sort of technical look at it is they're purely historical. There's no science fiction elements other than this chap or lady turning up in a blue box who's a time traveller.
Yeah, that's the thing. I'm desperately trying to sort of grope my way towards whether to avoid just going yes, no, and just go down and tick box on those kind of criteria. Right.
I'm trying to bend the rules a little bit because my having looked at the Crusade again, that's made me fall in love with Hartnell stories again almost. And one of my favourite stories with a sort of historical slant is the Time Meddler.
Yes, yeah,
and that's a wonderful historic setting and a key pivotal moment in history, and it's got the wonderful character, the meddling monk, in it as well. It was one of my favourites. So I was just thinking, how blurred are the lines between something that's purely historical, like the Aztecs, and then you've got something like, I don't know, you've got the King's Demons that has a little bit of somebody from the future or someone, a time traveller, interfering with the story again.
So I mean, the Time Meddler is fantastic because you're so sold on the historical setting that it's a real kind of lurch to suddenly realise. I mean, obviously not for probably for the three of us because we're already spoiled by the fact that it's got the meddling monk in it. But if you take yourself back to the original viewing, for the first however long, it just feels like an ordinary historical, and suddenly you realise that there's anachronisms going on, and then eventually you get the sight of a TARDIS, and you suddenly think, oh my goodness, now the story's turned on its head. So yeah.
Yes. Isn't the gramophone reveal the first?
Yes, I think that's it.
Isn't the skipping gramophone the first hint we get that something's wrong with the monks chanting is actually the gramophone back on? It's lovely. It's such a shame that there were some things like that you can't go back and experience completely fresh, as someone would have seen that in as your average fanatical Doctor Who viewer would have experienced it in 1965. So you wouldn't be expecting that, would you? You think, okay, now here's Doctor Who in an exciting adventure with some Vikings and some Normans and some Saxons, rather, and then they're going to throw that one at you.
So if you could both pick one of each, one purely historical with no science fiction in it, other than the Doctor's arrival, and then a story I call it a sort of time-bending story, like the Time Warrior. Which two would you each pick?
Well, I'll tell you a story that I saw. Well, I saw it. I saw the reconstruction of not all that long ago. That I really loved was the Highlanders. I mean, I have to say I knew almost nothing about the Highlanders one way or another. I don't think I'd ever listened to the soundtrack of it. I'd not read the Target novelisation. It came out too late for me. And so I didn't really know what it was about, to be honest. I mean, I'd seen the odd synopsis here or there. So, yeah, I mean, I came on that relatively unspoiled. And there's some fantastic stuff in that story. Polly in particular is fantastic. She leads everyone an absolute merry dance in it.
Poor old Algernon Finch.
Yeah. I mean, the Doctor
is everything that's coming to him, but yeah.
Indeed. The Doctor is crazy. I mean, he's absolutely crazy, but he's almost like a sideshow in it at times. He's not really driving the plot so much. I mean, there are parts when he does. And Jamie's such an incidental character, really. You sort of feel because of his, because he becomes such an important character that his opening story must be an important figure. But actually, he's neither here nor there. And the reason that they ask him to join, I guess, is more because they like Fraser than because they thought that the character of Jamie was fantastic. But yeah, no, it's. I mean, it's. I would certainly recommend to anyone, if you can find the loose cannon version of the Highlanders on the internet somewhere. You don't honestly have to look all that hard to find it. Then it's definitely well worth a look.
Thank you.
It's got very dark undercurrent. It's got very dark undercurrent to it as well, isn't it? The Highlanders.
Oh yeah. I mean the whole Highland clearances and so on, and the nastiness of the English soldiers. Yeah, it does.
Yeah. It's interesting. I go, because that comes from the tail end of the original run of historicals, where I think you could say they get more playful in some. I don't know. I guess they're always doing different things, but that's obviously towards the very end. You've got things where they're more riffing on what sort of classic literature's take on certain things. So this is really out of in the vein of Kidnapped and those Robert Louis Stevenson adventure stories and things like that. And the Smugglers is obviously the Bastard Child of Moonfleet and Treasure Island. Yeah. And then, but I mean, for me, I personally, I can't get past. I think it has to be the Aztecs.
Very good.
Is just it's a superlative episode, story in so many ways. And interestingly enough, it does quite raise this question of where do you draw the line and how do you find a pure historical? Because although it's a pure historical in terms of that there are no other science fiction trappings of all of them, it's the one where the science fiction concept of can you alter history? What does it of all of the historicals that I can bring to mind, it's the one where that is put front and centre. So in some ways, it's a sci-fi story, in that it's debating that question of what are the ethics and the implications within the Doctor Who universe of trying to do, if Barbara tries to do that. And I don't think there's anything that really touches on it quite so much. Although obviously the Crusade briefly touches on it at the end. Vicky ponders on whether they could sort of help Richard by or change things by sort of telling Richard that he's not going to get to Jerusalem. But yes, and again, that's very much at the the Aztecs is very much at the Shakespearean end of the historical scale, isn't it? Yeah, it's one of those perfect storms of everything coming together and making something really outstanding, just as a piece of television as well as a piece of Doctor Who, I think.
Sure. So, Simon, you got a favourite?
Yes,
very good. The Highlanders is high on my list as well, but I love the Smugglers.
Oh yeah,
another story. Sadly, there's very little remaining of it, but I've got a big soft spot for Cornwall because I'm a huge Poldark fan. So I love the setting. From what we can see and hear of it, I think the acting is top notch in it as well.
Yeah.
And it's just a lovely historical romp. It's a strong Ben and Polly story, and there's not enough of those really for me.
No,
They're
absolutely.
two of my favourite characters and companions, and they're much overlooked. So that's a really strong one for me. And then all the time bending ones, there's all sorts that springs. I mean, there's Pyramids of Mars.
Yes.
The Time Warrior, the Mask of Mandragora, I think's my favourite.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, for
The time bending ones.
But that I was going to say Evil of the Daleks. I quite like the Victorian setting in that, and the juxtaposition of the Daleks against the country house. I think is quite interesting. Do not feed the flying pests. Whatever it is.
Yes, I suppose we were doing...
Yes, they tend to crap all over your car, don't they?
Yes. Yeah, Dalek bodywork is a hell to clean.
Yeah.
All those bumps. Yes, I suppose if we were picking the ones with more sci-fi to them, I would, having name checked it already, I think I'd probably say Vincent and the Doctor. I'd go new series, really.
Good choice, yep.
And again, it's one of those marvellous things where does something different with the format. It's in some ways it almost is a pure historical. And okay, I guess we're meant to take the monster at face value as being a real monster. But yes, and it does that marvellous, sappy, very Richard Curtis moment of where it's one of those things that only a non-Doctor Who writer would come in and say, well, why can't I just take him to the future and show him what his legacy is going to be? Because anyone more versed in the series lore will say, well, no, you can't rewrite history, not one line. Yeah, so that would be my choice.
Although he kind of has his cake and eats it too, doesn't he? Because he still doesn't change the history. But I mean, I think it works in both ways. I think it has the marvellous moment where he realises that he has had an impact, and yet also that that's not going to change the ultimate impact, because in the end, of course, it's not really about his self-esteem, is it? It's an illness that he's got.
Yes, yeah.
Good. Well, Simon, thanks for that. It's food for thought. Sorry, did you have anything else you wanted to say to us?
No, all solid choices. I came up with a great big list. There's Talons of Wing Chiang. That's a historical setting.
If Paul were with us, he probably would have pulled that one out.
But no, that was a lot of fun, and that was all kick-started, of course, by watching The Crusade.
Yeah. What I'm really keen to talk to you about before we come to a finish is Showman. I mean, I read Richard Marson's biography of JNT when it came out, and I thought I'd read the definitive account of his life. I mean, certainly, 400 odd pages. I mean, there was a lot in there, and it's a fantastic book. But I mean, I was interested to watch your documentary, and you come up with quite a few new angles on JNT that weren't in the book. Yeah, and possibly also the balance is such that we come away with a slightly more sympathetic view of John. I mean, certainly you've not shied away from the fact that he had some flaws in it, and some things didn't go too well. But on the other hand, it did feel a real celebration, and certainly I felt quite emotional at the end of it, thinking of the highs and the lows of his life, all sort of all in one.
Yeah. Well, I think to an extent there's a certain redressing of the balance that we wanted to do with Showman. That I think in Doctor Who documentaries over the years, there's been a tendency, partly because John's not been around to defend himself, that there's been a sense that if something went wrong on the show, it was John's fault. And occasionally we'd get an opportunity to sing his praises, and I think we did a Greatest Show in the Galaxy making of, where you could legitimately say John saved the day, and unless John had used his knowledge of the BBC, they wouldn't have been able to continue filming and get it made, But I thought on Showman, I wanted to do something that was more balanced towards John, and that gave a sense of, it wasn't like they gave the top job on Doctor Who to an idiot. He must have known what he was doing to get that job and to hold it down, and to make some of my favourite Doctor Who. So who was he? And I think I've known Richard Marson for about 10 years now. We're good friends, and I'd really enjoyed his book. It's a very tough read as the book, and obviously there was a lot of kind of unfortunate tabloid interest at the time that I know was hard for Richard as well. But it's a fascinating book, and I can't underestimate the research that Richard put into that book of tracking down people from John's childhood and really pinpointing, I think, that potential that John had as a young man. And the thing that really connected to me about the story was the idea of John's life as a really pure, awful, kind of mythic Greek rise and fall. That his life is almost like a perfect pyramid shape. That for me kind of leads him directly up to the 5 Doctors and Longleat, and then directly down from that. And it was so unusual, I think, to see a life that had such a direct shape to it, that such a direct tragedy to it. So that was the thing that I thought, if we can compassionately tell a story of this rise and fall in a way that is responsible and sympathetic but realistic at the same time, then that's what we want to do. So I went to Richard and I said, we don't want to. It's not that we're adapting the book, but we'd like to build on the foundations of the book and tell our own story. And so Richard came on board very happily, I think, as consultant, and obviously was a very key interviewee for us. Yeah, and I think in a good way, it's always going to end up as a different beast to the book, But you can't underestimate that legacy that the book has that we could build on, And I think then it was thinking, well, what can I do to make this visual in a way that the book can't, So a lot of the creative on that film was channeled into that sense of, that I took cameras to every place in John's life that I could go to, and we kind of drift through John's footsteps all the way through his life, from literally the house that he grew up in, through his school, through the BBC, and through all of the houses that he lived at, all the places that he knew. And I think by the end of the film, I think one of my favourite moments that our editor Richard Alderson put together is that moment towards the end when John's life has just ended in our narrative, and you then revisit in a short montage kind of all of those locations. You kind of walk back through and you think, well, the man is gone, but the places remain and they're still in our world. And I found it very moving to do. Yes. And the last 20 minutes of that film is probably the stuff I'm most proud of, I think. And it was and it's been lovely actually to see the reaction to that. That we were able to screen it at the BFI, which felt really special, and lovely to be able to invite the contributors to it, the interviewees, along to be a part of that. And it's been really good to see it go out into the world. And I had somebody, when it was announced, somebody tweeted me and said, "Are you going to address all of the accusations about John?" And I just thought, well, I think people need to be realistic about what you can talk about on a box set that's going to be viewed by different members of the family. Quite. And I think the film is mature and responsible about acknowledging that side of John's life, and we kind of allude to it and touch on that core idea that John's greatest flaw, I think, was blurring the lines and kind of not knowing when to put a separation between the professional and the personal. And the fact that he got too close to fans, they got too close to him, was part of that tragedy of his life. And I think part of the way that the BBC perceived him as not being proper somehow, not being a proper producer. I think that's all connected. So we tried to be as all encompassing as we possibly could in that film. And I think that film is the reason that the box set is a 12, I think, because it's quite a grown up doc, I hope, for that kind of for that kind of situation, for that kind of box set.
Yeah. So I mean, in my own life experience and career, I mean, a million miles away from what John Nathan Turner did, but I had a scenario where I ended up in a role in the organisation I work for where, like John, it was, I kind of knew the role and how to do it, and it was convenient for everybody, that I keep doing that thing because no one else kind of knew what to do. Yeah. But equally, it's year after year doing that same thing, it becomes very difficult. And at some point, you get a a boss who's less sympathetic and thinks, who's this old geezer who's been doing this for however long? You know, do we really need this? Do we really want that? And you know, in my career, I was fortunate that, you know, someone else in the organisation saw my potential and moved me into something else. I got a helping hand, and John didn't get that. And I think that was, you know, what struck me was that there were many people who could have offered John a helping hand, but nobody, or you know, if they did, he didn't take it.
Yeah, I think he was a victim of certainly his own early success, you know, and testament to how we can all have too much of a good thing, you know, how, you know, if John, I think, probably had a few opportunities where he may have stayed with the less risky option, you know. I think we talk about this in the film, that if he'd gone freelance earlier, you know, then things could have ended up very different. And I think he's a really good parable for how we should all take a chance every now and again, you know, and you can stay too long in the same role, you know, and I think John definitely found that to his detriment after that. So it was very sad, and I think that was the thing that I was really interested in, really, just to really be able to tell that story and let the viewer decide what they thought of John off the back of that.